Hi everyone, Mrs. Craven here. I wanted to make a quick video walking through the solutions for 8, 85, and 86. I'm also going to post just the answers, like a picture of the answer key. But in case you're still struggling with this, maybe not quite sure how to find those zeros, the roots in 85, or I know there's some questions about 86, especially part A. I want to walk you through and show you what you can do for those. So I'm going to start with 85. All four of these are going to use the zero product property. One of them is already in factored form, and then the other three we're going to put in factored form. So I'm going to start with A. A is already in factored form. You can see there are two factors multiplied together to give 0. So that means that we can break this into two parts. So either 6x minus 18 equals 0, or 3x plus 2 equals 0. And then we're just going to go through and solve these two equations to get our two solutions. So x equals 3, or x equals negative 2/3. So there's your solution for A. Moving on to B. B is one that we have to put into factored form first. It's a pretty straightforward one to factor. If you are still using generic rectangles, that is not a problem at all. Or if you have started developing your own shortcuts, this would be one where it's not too difficult to figure out that our product is positive 10, our sum is negative 7, so it's a minus 5, minus 2. And you might even be at the point where you're coming up with shortcuts where you can just simply look at this factor and know that 5 is going to make this one equal to 0, and 2 is going to make this one equal to 0. So we could say x equals 5, or x equals 2. And again, if you want to set up those two equations and solve them, that's perfectly fine. There's nothing stopping you. Personally, when I look at this one, I look through here and I see a common factor of 2. So I'm just going to divide a 2 out of there. In fact, I'm just going to divide both sides by 2 to make it a little easier to work with. So I get x squared. I'm keeping my equation perfectly balanced. X squared plus x minus 6 equals 0. I get x plus 3 times x minus 2, because our product has to be negative 6 here, so 3 times negative 2 is negative 6, but our sum has to be a positive 1. So it's positive 3 and negative 2 add together to give us positive 1. So x is going to equal, again, you might be able to just look at these parentheses and figure it out. It'd have to be negative 3, or x equals 2. So there's our solution for C. And then we move on to D, and D, if you notice, has just two terms with no middle term at all. That is a special case. This is the difference of two squares. And if you remember, I'm going to put this side note over here. A squared minus b squared always factors this way. A plus b times a minus b. That is the difference of two squares. So this would be 2x plus 1 times 2x minus 1 equals 0. And then if I go through and solve each of those, I have 2x plus 1 equals 0. So 2x equals negative 1 and x equals negative 1/2. Or over here we would have 2x minus 1 equals 0. 2x equals 1, or x equals 1/2. And there are our x-intercepts. We could call them x-intercepts, we can call them zeros, we can call them solutions, we can call them roots. There are 4 different names that you will interchangeably see, and we'll talk more about that next week when we are looking for solutions to a quadratic equation. So that's how you work through those 4. Then we move on to 86. And in 86, the question is, they want you to sketch parabolas, sketch quadratic graphs, just using the given information. And they give you pieces and parts, and it looks like when you look at the pieces and parts, it's like, oh yeah, I totally have enough to do this. I've got my 2 x-intercepts in A, which means I can I can find my vertex, right? My vertex is going to have, let's see, I need to do 2 plus 7 divided by 2. So that's 9 divided by 2, that's 4.5. So the x-coordinate of my vertex is going to be 4.5. Trouble is, I can't find my y-coordinate because I don't have an equation. Well, that's fine. We can get a little creative, and we can write an equation. We can use our x-intercepts to write an equation, and I'm just going to jot this up here. I mean, I could say, well, this must be then x minus 2 and x minus 7. And again, I'm going to go into that a little bit more next week on Monday. We're going to look at writing equations if you're given tables, if you're given information like that. But the trouble is, if we were to multiply this back out, we would not get a y-intercept of negative 18. We would actually get a y-intercept of 14. Or I'm sorry, of negative 8. We would get a y-intercept of 14, and that's not correct. So that presents a problem here because we're getting a little beyond what we're capable of doing. So I would highly recommend, if you noticed, I'm going to switch over to the ebook. If you noticed in the book, when you're looking at 86, there is an e-tool. So I'm clicking on that e-tool, and it puts me into Desmos. And what it says, hint, move the sliders below to sketch all of these. So they give you these sliders, and I'm going to look at this parabola with x-intercepts of 2, 0, and 7, 0, and notice they tell you that C and D, those sliders represent our x-intercepts. So I'm going to take these sliders, and I'm going to slide one of them to 2, and I'm going to slide the other one to 7. So now I have my x-intercepts in the right place. The trouble is, if you look at my graph over here, I don't have my y-intercept in the right place. So I must need to adjust A in some way because I want to get the graph to go through a y-intercept of negative 8. Oh, that's going to be a problem. So I'm just going to mess around with the graph a little bit. If I slide it to the right, I'm not getting anywhere near to negative 8. So I'm going to take it and start sliding to the left. And my y-intercept, you can see as I move to the left, is getting lower and lower. It looks like I need A to be negative for sure. So now I need to work a little bit on moving it back. And I don't think I'm going to be able to get this exactly, but I'm getting a little bit closer. Almost there. Ooh, that's tricky. That's about as close as I can get. So right now I am looking at a situation where I've got these 2 points are in the right spot, and this point is awfully close. In fact, if I wonder if I could even, no, I can't. I would have to just be able to slide that as carefully as I possibly can. But all they want is a sketch. So all you have to do is once you get it to this point is just sketch what that graph would look like. You can see that my x-intercept here is, my vertex is at 4.5. Again, I'm off a little bit, but not too bad. But that's as good as it's going to get for this equation because at this point in time, we don't have any other tools. We can go through the same thing for B and for C. We can also, I'm just going to go back and talk about them for a minute in my notes section. With one x-intercept at negative 1, 0, right here, and a y-intercept at 0, 3, if you think about that, just to get a picture of what that graph looks like. So one x-intercept at negative 1, 0 would be right here, and a y-intercept at 0, 3 would be here. So there has to be, at negative 2, the mirror image has to be negative 2, 3. There has to be a mirror image over here. So that would give me 3 points to sketch that graph. You could certainly pick a couple more points to try and figure it out, but at this point, I think that's good enough. You've got 3 graphs. And again, if you go back to that tool, you can work with the tool to come up with the sketch. C definitely gives you the information you need to come up with a perfect graph. There would be no question about what this graph could look like because you can find your x-intercepts at -5, 0 and at 1, 0. You could come up with a y-intercept. Let's not go there first. You could come up with a vertex. The vertex would have to be at -2. I got -2 from averaging -5 and 1. And then I'm going to simply put -2 in for x in the equation. And I'm going to get 3 times -3, so I'm going to get -9. I've got my vertex. I can go through and multiply this back out and come up with a y-intercept, which would be the constant term, or I could just put 0 into place. I would get a y-intercept of -5, so be 0, -5, and I've got all the points that I need to graph that one. So that should provide some help with 86. Those are the 2 questions that you had for homework, and again, I will also post an image of just the answers if you wanted to just check the answers. Hope that helps, and have a great weekend.